Welcome to Rethink You, bringing you ideas, inspiration, and motivation to start living the life you were created to live. Here is your host, author, trainer, speaker, and coach, and founder of Rethink You, Kim Levings.
Well, hello there. It's Kim Levings with the Rethink You podcast. I'm really excited to bring to you today another powerful speaker by the name of Pilar Gerasimo. That's Gerasimo. She is an award-winning health journalist and a pioneering social explorer. But the thing that connected me with Pilar was that I read her book, and she published a book called The Healthy Deviant, a rule breaker's guide to being healthy in an unhealthy world. This, together with one or two others, were just my best reads of 2020, especially during lockdown. It was fascinating to get hold of these really good books. And I was affirmed to know that I, in fact, was a healthy deviant. So we're going to have conversations about that. But, Pilar is also best known for her work as the founding editor of Experience Life magazine, which today reaches millions, more than 3 million with each issue. And she also served as the top health editor for the Huffington Post. And she's visiting faculty for the Institute of Integrative Nutrition. You can see why I'm delighted to be interviewing another powerhouse. And those of you who are now starting to hear me talk about the Think Health Summit that we're hosting in May through ReThinkYou and Positive Blueprints, Pilar is another speaker on our panel. And today she co-hosts the top-rated podcast called The Living Experiment, and she teaches online courses through her digital learning platform, the Healthy Deviant Academy. She guest lectures at universities and leads workshops at top retreat centers and consults with organizations committed to transforming health and happiness at work and around the globe. When she's not traveling, Pilar hangs out on an organic communal family farm in Wisconsin with her pit bull, Calvin. I'd love to meet Calvin one day. So Pilar, just a powerful, bio and background. And why don't you kick us off by saying, first of all, what is a healthy deviant? And how did you get started as a health journalist and a social explorer pioneer?
Absolutely. First of all, thank you so much for the lovely invitation. And for folks who haven't seen it, this is the book, The Healthy Deviant, A Rule Breaker's Guide to Being Healthy in an Unhealthy World. And I show it because there was a long period of time where I was talking about healthy deviance, but I hadn't really formulated it and talked about it in a packaged kind of way. I spent 5 years on this book because it was really important for me to broadcast to more people that they are not alone, and that many of us who are pursuing health improvement end up feeling isolated or weird or like some kind of social outcast or freak because the decisions that we have to make, the choices that we make, the behaviors that we observe on a daily basis are so different from the vast majority of the other people who are around us. And I know that you are a healthy deviant yourself, and that we tend to resonate with each other and find each other. And it's always such a relief to know we're not alone. So what a healthy deviant is really any person who chooses to deviate from our current standard social norms and patterns and behaviors and defaults in ways that empower them to become and stay healthier than average. And, right now, that's not a very high bar, frankly. We live in a culture here in the US where fully 60% of US adults have been diagnosed with at least one chronic illness. So right away, it's more than half. If you don't have a diagnosis for a chronic illness, that's less common. 70% of people are overweight or obese, taking regular doses of prescription drugs. 80% of US adults, and I know that this is true in other countries, are not thriving or flourishing mentally and emotionally. That's a huge number of people. But then when it comes down to the daily healthy habits that put you in good form to stay healthy and happy for the long haul, that number is even lower. 97.3% of US adults are not practicing even the most basic healthy behaviors that would be required for them to stay healthy and happy for the long haul. And while the US here is somewhat famous for its declining health, despite the fact that we spend more money on healthcare than almost any place in the world, Unfortunately, wherever we have exported our kind of Western standard diet and way of living, those same types of numbers begin to change in the bad direction. And I'm thinking of places like China, India, the Middle East, pretty much any so-called, civilized or modern society where this way of living becomes the norm. Those statistics begin to emerge: chronic illness, depression, anxiety, and many other chronic conditions. So for me, Healthy Deviance is really about breaking the norms that are breaking us, breaking the rules that are breaking us, and beating the unhealthy odds that if you go along with what passes for normal will cause you to become unhealthy and unhappy, as most people unfortunately are these days.
Right. Just so well said. As I said, you actually give it a label that we are healthy deviants. And I would say that I'm almost there. And I know that we'll mention your quiz a little later. How did you get started in your career, though, Pilar? What sort of took you from school going down a pathway into nutrition and health and this, just incredible research that you've done and the writing that you've done over the years about these issues?
Well, I always say sometimes when you look backwards, your path in life makes a lot more sense than when you're trying to plan it. And I didn't think I was going to have a career in health. I mean, for me, it began as a function of my childhood growing up as a pretty healthy kid in a pretty healthy set of environments with healthy parents, and grew up on this organic family farm. And my dad was a sociologist. My mom was kind of a back to the land hippie farmer commune lady. And they just raised us to be as individual as we wanted to be. And we were raised with mostly whole foods and pretty healthy patterns of living. But what happened to me is what happens, I think, to a lot of folks who are raised as healthy kids and then go to school in a conventional school system and suddenly become aware that they don't fit in. And a lot of the ways that my sisters and I behaved, lived, ate, looked, we just weren't following what other people were doing. And that discomfort of not fitting in and of being told in no uncertain terms that I was weird or strange was very uncomfortable for me. So I went about the business of trying to fit in as a young person, really all through my teens and early 20s. But the more I pursued conventional ideals of health and beauty, being thin, looking a certain way, having the right clothes and makeup, the more I tried to hold myself to that standard and go along with what was being presented as required to have that look, diet routine, yo-yo diets and crazy exercise routines and just not eating for days and then starving and feeling I needed to eat everything in sight and going to the fast food drive-through. I started feeling kind of crazy, and I lost my health and happiness to the degree that finally it became a necessary project for me to reclaim them. Now, what's interesting is that I turned, as many people do, to conventional health and fitness magazines in my late 20s to try to get back to the healthy place I'd been as a kid. And that, unfortunately, actually made matters worse because now I was holding myself to the standard of what I saw on the cover of those magazines. And I was also trying to follow this whipsawing advice of one diet one week and one diet the next week. And I had to just do these 5 exercises every day and I'd be fine. And it just started making me feel less and less confident and capable. And my self-esteem dropped even more. So it took me a really long time. I put myself on it almost like a scholar because my background was academic up until that point. I was a comparative literature student, thought I was going to be a professor. And I was like, listen, I know how to do research. I can research my way through this mess. So I kind of went to school on how to become a healthier person. And lo and behold, I ended up finding out that a lot of what worked and was better supported by really good science was a lot of the stuff my parents had taught me as a kid about eating mostly whole foods most of the time, getting enough sleep, being outside during the day, being active, respecting my natural rhythms, being around healthy, happy people. But none of that was what was being presented in most of the magazines I was, or on TV for that matter, that I was seeing. So ultimately, I ended up figuring a lot out the hard way. And then once I figured it out, I was like, this is great. This is so much easier than what I was doing before. I need to tell people about this. That launched me into this idea of starting a magazine, which I then partnered with Lifetime Fitness. It was then now called Lifetime, the Healthy Way of Life company. This is me back in 2014 with brown hair or blonde hair. I don't know. The only time I was ever on the cover of my own magazine. But this magazine ended up just doing great and reaching, like you said, close to 3 million people with each issue now. But during the course of the 20 years that I, researched and read and worked on projects for the magazine, I learned a lot of what I needed to know and had the very gratifying experience of seeing how well it worked for other people. And that really convinced me that if you can get the right information and inspiration into people's hands and keep them away from that downward spiral into hopelessness that is caused by trying and failing at the things that don't work, it's really elating and exciting. And the rewards of that, both for the people who get healthier and for you as a person who is assisted in some small way in getting them onto that more rewarding journey, it's just wonderful. So I decided I wanted to have my whole life be about that. And that's kind of what it's been like ever since. So it was 2001 that we started the magazine. So fully 20 years ago. And I've been at it ever since.
That's absolutely fabulous. I know I enjoy reading my issue of Experience Life every month because I'm a member of Lifetime. So it's interesting to connect those dots. But what you just said was important, Pilar. I want to go back to it and re-emphasize it when you said that many aspects of our culture and how our society is set up is actually stacked against us. So people may have the best intentions, and yet no matter what they do, they continue to struggle to find the right solutions. And I know that this is one of your personal missions, to really help people recognize that the so-called normal culture is actually working against you, and how to figure that out. So if somebody's listening to this and thinks, wow, maybe it isn't my fault that I'm sick and tired of being sick and tired, let's talk about sort of some starting steps. And obviously I want people to read your book, but right now, I mean, after they listen to this podcast, what are just a couple of simple things that people could change in their lives?
Oh, yeah. Well, one of the things that's interesting about what we think of as the challenges of being a healthy person is that it is programmed into the daily expected patterns and the way that we live. We get up and the first thing we do is we look at our phones or turn on the TV or turn on the radio. And right away, we're plugged in to this set of messages and stresses and insistences that we do and be and have stuff, respond to things that we can't control. And from the moment we wake up, we are put onto a sort of treadmill of normal behaviors, reaching for coffee first thing, which I happen to love, but reaching then for typically the normal breakfast is like breakfast cereal or bagels or something that has a lot of carbohydrates in it. Off to the races. Now you're going through your day and you're working without a break. You're constantly back and forth between these kinds of devices. And so it goes throughout the entire day until somehow magically at the end of the day, you're supposed to drop off and fall into a deep, peaceful slumber, which most people have really got a lot of trouble with now. And what it comes down to is that the way we're living is dysregulating to the way our system is designed to work. The human body has very basic functions and needs for certain well-regulated biochemistry. Not too much blood sugar, not too little. Not too much hydration, not too little. Not too much potassium or saline. So the body is constantly trying to regulate itself. We live in a society that is dysregulating, and all of the normal, so-called normal patterns that we follow cause our bodies to become imbalanced, inflamed, dysregulated, and kind of freaked out a lot of the time. Then we start experiencing the results of that, and we experience them as uncontrollable cravings for sugar, salt, fat. We experience them as depression or low mood or low energy, anxiety. We then respond to those feelings by doing coping behaviors like drinking or drugs or disappearing into our television sets or our screens, or falling prey to addictions of various kinds. Then we look at ourselves and we think, what is wrong with me? I must be a bad person to not be successful in this world where all of the media tells me everyone else seems to be successful all the time. And this is what I call the vicious cycle of the unhealthy default reality. We then look for solutions to those problems, and they typically come in the form of prescription drugs, pills, powders, diets, exercise programs, fix me programs. And a lot of times we do just end up consuming more and more, how do I fix myself, products and media. But those solutions really don't tend to work in the context of our unhealthy society. It's just one more layer of things that we feel we should do and that we end up feeling we're not succeeding at. So what my prescription, if I have anyone at all, is like getting people to hop from that vicious downward spiral, what I call the vicious cycle of the unhealthy default, so normal reality, into a cycle that I call the virtuous cycle of healthy deviance. And it's interesting, it doesn't begin with diet and exercise, even though I'm a big believer in good nutrition and healthy movement, because most of the prescriptions for diet and exercise that we're given, even when they're relatively smart prescriptions, like whole food eating and so forth, we can't do them in the context of the society we're living in from a depleted, overwhelmed place. So I really put the emphasis first on just becoming aware that this is the cycle that you've been stuck in and that you're not alone. 97% plus of US adults have fallen prey to that cycle. So it's not you, it's the culture, it's the unhealthy default reality. Once you have that awareness, then you can become more willing to deviate from these norms that have been keeping you down, not by forcing yourself into diet and exercise routines, but by reclaiming what I call the lost mojo that this society has taken out. So I really focus first on helping people re-regulate their dysregulated systems by beginning their days and ending their days differently, and by observing kind of the natural oscillating rhythm that I call Altradian rhythms, or that is what they're called by science, that most people never learn about, but that are programmed into our bodies, just like our heart beating or our eyes blinking. Respecting the fact that we need to take rest breaks throughout the day. Sounds so simple. And your people like, no, just give me the diet. Just tell me what to eat. I am telling you, I have been on every diet in the world, and re-regulating my system made it much, much easier for me to make sensible eating decisions and sensible drinking decisions and sensible other decisions. When you're freaked out and depleted and exhausted and overwhelmed and your body and mind are dysregulated, you are at the mercy of the automatic default choices. Excuse me. You're at the mercy of the automatic default choices that our society presents you with. So it's a different way of approaching health improvement. Ultimately, you get to eating healthier, moving more regularly, doing all the things that we know we quote unquote should do. But let's not continue to beat ourselves up for the fact that those are difficult things to embrace in the context of a culture where almost everybody else is doing the other thing, the unhealthy, easy default choices.
Just so many good things in there, Pilar. Thank you so much. And I had to, share a brief story. As my listeners know, I try not to talk too much because my speakers always have such powerful messages. But I just experienced this, and as you and I know that I've been, following this deviance routine for a few years now, and choices in diet, and I recently went on vacation, and I made the decision. Typically, I normally stay at Airbnb so that I can self-cater. For that exact reason, in all my business travel, I discovered it's impossible to get my healthy diet at a hotel. It's just impossible. And you don't always have access to good restaurants. So I chose to self-cater. So I recently went on a vacation, and I intentionally stayed in a hotel because I'm like, I don't want to have to deal with self-catering. And I was in Mexico for a week. And by the time I got home, I was sick and exhausted because for 7 days, I hadn't been able to find a single healthy thing to eat. Every meal I had made me sick. Mm-hmm. And the first day back, I went to my farmer's market and shopped. And I thought, I'm definitely a deviant because I couldn't wait to actually slice up my greens and my lean protein and my organic food and make myself a really healthy stir fry that night. I was literally craving this healthy food. So I realized how much I had been a deviant for so long that just going on a vacation suddenly became a nightmare, that every day I got sicker and sicker and sicker as there was more and more inflammation in my body. It was impossible to find healthy food. So I'm just really identifying with you. But the Altradian rhythm, I think perhaps is a new concept to listeners. And so I'd love you to go sciencey on us for a few minutes and talk to me about that, because even as a reader of your book, as you were talking, I realized in recent months I've been guilty of that. I get up, go, 10, 12, 14 hours a day, fall into bed exhausted. And I've been missing those little rest breaks and not tracking my rhythms. So talk to us a little bit more about what is the Altradian rhythm and how do we tap into that and understand that within our bodies?
Absolutely. Well, I always like to start by explaining that we do know something, most of us, about circadian rhythms, which are those rhythms that occur on a 24-hour cycle. The dark, the light, the sleeping versus waking, being high energy versus low energy. And we know that when our circadian rhythms get disrupted because we pull in all-nighter or we travel across time zones or something else happens that disrupts us, we end up not feeling good and not functioning well. Again, we're dysregulated by that disruption of the circadian rhythm. Ultradian rhythms are like mini circadian rhythms. They're small rhythms that occur many times throughout the day. Ultra, meaning many, the deo, kind of Latin of day, ultradian, many times throughout the day. Those rhythms happen on instead of 24-hour cycle, every 90 to 120 minutes. Typically, you have higher energy and focus for about 90 minutes, and then you'll have a period of low energy called an Altradian Trough, like a dip. And what you experience in that dip is lower energy, inability to focus, often lowered mood, distractibility, that kind of stuff. And people often fight that first feeling that happens. Let's say if you start working at 9, by about 10:30 in the morning, you're going to be hitting your dip. And there's a reason for this that's really makes a ton of sense when you think about it. While you're busy doing all the things you're doing, being productive, your body is building up the byproducts of that productivity in the form of metabolic waste, cellular debris, neurosynaptic snippets, little pieces of information that your brain doesn't know what to do with. And after a while, you start experiencing the buildup of those basically pollution products, byproducts, as stress. And your body is giving you the signals of fatigue and distraction and lower mood and energy because it's trying to get you to take a break. Sometimes people feel hungry. Sometimes people feel like they want to get up and go to the bathroom. They just feel fidgety. You'll start to notice people who have nervous habits. After about an hour and a half of focusing, they're picking at their nails or pulling on their hair, or their foot's starting to fidget. They're picking up their fidget spinners. All of those are signals that the body wants a little bit of time, about 20 minutes, to recover, rebalance its biochemistry, repair some damage, detoxify, get organized. And then all those systems come back online with full mojo. And then you experience this return back up to a high productivity peak. So it really does look like a classic oscillating rhythm like this, like a wave pattern. 90 minutes up, about 20 minutes down. If you take that break, if you respect your body's request for a break, you have amazing return of energy, and you'll find things like food cravings largely either radically decrease or disappear entirely. And I often ask people to notice when they get their food cravings. Like typically there's like the donut, coffee, sugar craving mid-morning. There's another carb craving mid-afternoon. Sometimes in people, if they skip lunch, they'll experience it midday too. But lunch breaks are one kind of built-in ultradian break, but I usually advise people at least one mid-morning and one mid-afternoon break to give your body a chance to do that repair and recovery work and give yourself a chance to benefit from all that new energy. Here's another really interesting thing that happens. When you take that break, one of the major things that rebalances is blood sugar. And our energy stores, like adenosine triphosphate, which is what the body uses for energy. All the things we eat turn into that eventually. So if you take a break, you'll find your blood sugar is better regulated. This is super important for people with their like type 2 diabetes or metabolic syndrome. Taking those breaks for light movement or a healthy snack or just resting, meditating, breathing, chilling out, getting away from your screens is really important. Moving away from whatever you've been doing. Like if you're at a desk, you want to get up and move. If you're one of those like FedEx delivery drivers who's running around madly moving, you want to slow down and be still. But you need to switch gears during that break period. When people do that, what they find is that appetite regulation is much easier, mood regulation, much better, focus, productivity throughout the day, much better, fewer mistakes, fewer accidents, fewer problems of various kinds. You get in fewer fights with your colleagues and loved ones. And interestingly, what they've looked at, and the military has actually done a lot of the research on ultradian rhythms, is that it's more efficient to take those breaks from a time and productivity standard than it is to not take them. You will end up getting more and more of value done if you do take a break every 90 minutes or so. Now, it sounds really hard to do. People are like, how can I take a 20-minute break every hour and a half? I work all day long as it is, and I still can't get everything done. this is one of those places you have to be willing to experiment as a healthy deviant. When you start doing this differently, you will find extraordinary changes happening. And I mean, I will say I've been teaching this for probably close to 20 years now. And I still fall off the wagon myself from time to time. I forget to take these breaks and then I wonder, why am I feeling so crappy? Why do I suddenly want to eat cheese, curls? And it's almost always like I've missed the break to renourish, rehydrate, rest, recover. And I tell people, look, if you're starting to experience those symptoms of dysregulation, cravings, mood problems, lack of focus, ask yourself, when did I last take a break? What was going on about 2 hours ago? What have I been doing for the last 2 hours? And you'll find typically you've not been doing any of the things that your body needs you to do for it to stay at high capacity and full consciousness and have its mojo on board. So that's really, I talk about it, I call them URBs, Ultradian rhythm breaks, and they're one of 3 renegade rituals that I recommend to people who are healthy deviants or healthy deviants in the making, who want to really take a more empowered approach to their health change.
I love that, Pilar. And you're teaching us some new words. So we've learned about healthy deviance. Now we know about Altradian rhythm breaks, UDRs. And I also loved that the virtuous cycle of a healthy deviant versus the downward spiral of, the unhealthy default reality. Just some powerful things. Thank you. Thank you. So I also know that you work with organizations. It says that in your bio that you work with organizations who are passionate about employee health. I'd love you to talk to us about how you've helped organizations make that shift, because, many times people who are working in cube farms or organizational factories, I call them, are at the mercy of whatever the employer wants of them. And there's this unhealthy, I know from the work I do with leadership, that there's this unhealthy culture that the harder we push, the better the results. And in fact, it backfires on you because people do get burned out, stressed, and tired. I'd love to hear from you on how you've helped organizations make the shift in paradigm around this issue of giving the body the ultradian breaks, that the rhythm breaks that you were talking about.
Yeah. Sure. Well, it's interesting. A lot of what I do, I start by presenting the concepts of healthy deviance to groups of people in organizations. And then typically what happens is they ask me, they're in a course I'm doing, or they're in a presentation, or they hear an interview like this one. They're like, I would love to do this, but my work won't allow it. My work is set up in a way where I can't do this. Could you come and talk to the people in my organization? Or I lead a department, but I want the people in my department to understand this. So it's interesting. It's like how real life works. We learn something that works, and then we want the people around us to know it. So I typically start by explaining, again, what healthy deviance is and why it's working against not just our personal goals and desires of being healthier, happier people, but against our shared, collective, often corporate or organizational goals of trying to accomplish anything together. Because think about it. If you're hanging out with a group of colleagues who are sick, tired, low energy, depressed, angry, reactive, frustrated, incapable of focusing, taking it out on each other, that is not a fun way to work, but it's also not an efficient way to work. And it's a great way to have cultural breakdown at work that leads to human breakdown at work and at home. So I introduce these same basic concepts that I teach individuals, but I encourage folks in groups to think about how they can begin shifting the norms within their organization, often through experiments initially. It's very difficult for a large organization to say, okay, we're all going to get on this healthy deviant bandwagon now. Typically what happens is that a few people begin making these changes, sometimes in a department or a business unit, and things go better. And when they start to go better, they become bright spot outliers, and other people start noticing, like, what is Jane's group doing? I'll give you an example that's just a kind of a funny one from one of my workshops years ago. I was teaching a course out at the 1440 Multiversity, which is kind of in Silicon Valley neighborhood, Scotts Valley. And I had a guy from a leading software company who's a leader who was in one of these courses that I was teaching. And I was teaching about ultradian rhythm breaks, and I could see this light bulb going off in his head. And afterwards, he came up to me and he said, I have never heard about this before. The science is really interesting. He liked the fact that it was, military science. And he said, it's making me think about a situation at work differently. I have a guy who's part of my programming team who's a developer, who is getting into really big trouble with his coworkers because he brought a large beanbag chair into his cube, into his office space. And every day, a couple of times a day, he sacks out in this beanbag chair and basically takes a nap. And all of his colleagues are infuriated by this because they're working, work all day long. And they've begun like taking pictures of him and sending them to me and asking that I make an example of him or do something about him. But now I'm beginning to think maybe this guy knows what he's doing and he's taking ultradian rhythm breaks or something like them. And I was like, well, that's really interesting. What is this guy's performance like? And he's like, well, he's one of the best guys on my team. I mean, he's an incredibly creative programmer. He's very reliable. He's also nice and easy to work with. And I'm like, well, there's your answer. And he's like, yeah. So maybe the thing is actually making an example of him in a good way and saying, look, what this guy is doing, maybe more of us could be doing and should be doing. So I've had folks take that lesson to ad agencies and design studios, financial companies, a big venture capital company. I recently did a really fun presentation for International Monetary Fund staff. And I think that these concepts go across private, public, NGO. I mean, every industry has human beings in it. And every industry with human beings in it is typically suffering because those human beings are suffering from dysregulation, depletion, inflammation, reactivity, and more. And I'm really interested in helping organizations figure out how to embed the principles of healthy deviance into their own cultures, into their own mission and vision statements, really thinking about how to have the bigger why of their organization connected to the fact that they need healthier, happier, more functional people to get anything done and to be competitive. I will also say it's really interesting. Just a couple of days ago, a news piece came out in the financial papers and the general media about Goldman Sachs culture of unhealth, and a lot of the younger entry-level, bench-level analysts inside of a leading company like Goldman Sachs saying it's inhumane. We work 95-hour weeks. We're abused and insulted, and it's not sustainable. And I feel suicidal, and I can't continue this way. How is that good for anybody? That is not the way to create a leading organization. I was encouraged to hear that Goldman Sachs is reconsidering that. But I had somebody from Goldman Sachs in one of my talks not so very long ago, and she talked about her own experience, a very bright, shiny, super intelligent, highly educated person who is being reduced to a wounded animal by virtue of being in an organization that was not respecting the basic programming of a human being's function and what a human being needs to stay functional and give his or her or their best gifts for the long haul.
Wow, powerful. I'm so pleased I asked you about that, because that's exactly the trap, as you said, that some companies are falling into. And I'm reminded, as you were speaking about those, junior employees in Goldman Sachs, it also reminds me of the training that our doctors go through, when they go through their internships, and they also just, excuse me, working around the clock, weeks on end. It's just not healthy. And these are our medical providers that we're talking about. So I think that in many pockets of culture, we have this issue. And I know that you will meet Dr. Gupta, who's going to also be on the Think Health Summit. And he and the group at Guardhouse are doing some significant study into physician burnout. The same thing that you're talking about. It's like whether you're a doctor or a software engineer, a pilot or soldier, you cannot function healthily if your body is not healthy, as you said, if you're dysregulated. So this is just a fascinating conversation. Yes.
Education is another one. I think I hear a lot from teachers and administrators and guidance counselors in schools about how they observe this in their own their ranks of the team that they work with, and in the children who are experiencing dysregulation. And we see things like mood and behavior disorders in kids, and we see the terribly rising statistics of disease, incidence of disease in even younger children, chronic diseases, dyslipidemias, like diabetes, heart disease at younger and younger ages. And it is partially, absolutely, a lot of it is the food that we feed our kids or that the kids get fed, but a lot of it is this dysregulation problem problem too of not respecting the needs that our bodies, minds have at home, at work, at play, all through anywhere we are. We bring this basic programming on board with us. And it's very efficient. If you think about it, the human body is capable of functioning with relatively minimal inputs and care for 80 years, nonstop. Your heart just keeps beating, your eyes keep blinking. But you have to do some basic things to keep that system functioning well and healing and recovering from the damage that's done to you just by virtue of living in our unhealthy culture, the unhealthy default reality. So I think, yeah, physician burnout is a great example. And I think it's really important to remember how all of this trickles down. When you go to work with unhealthy, unhappy people, when you go to the hospital and are treated by exhausted, depleted, distracted people, when you show up at an emergency situation and the first responders are not in their right mind, all things go badly. And I think that we're seeing this too with police violence and all of the, here I'm in Minneapolis area where George Floyd's murder happened this past summer. There's so much reactivity programmed in to the way that we are living. We cannot hope to bring our most compassionate, thoughtful, sensible, creative problem-solving selves to any of the challenges that we're facing. And as a world, we're facing bigger and bigger challenges like climate change, existential threats. How are we going to solve those problems if 97.3% of us can't even manage to maintain our basic healthy habits and show up with anything like the birthright that I think of as, a reasonable level of energy and focus and capacity and resilience? Our vitality when we come into this world is usually reasonably high as babies, and we just lose it as we begin conforming to the culture's expectations and demands of us. So I'm all about helping people, reclaim their lost energy and enthusiasm so that they can show up and give their best gifts in whatever, job or career or world they choose to inhabit.
Absolutely. As I said, this is such a great topic because it touches on so many other areas, and podcasts that I know are in the queue coming up. I'm also going to be interviewing Joe Smara with Solution Point Plus, and he does work with first responders and specifically law enforcement on dealing with PTSD and stress and reactivity, and he teaches behavioral health. So I think that there's some connecting of the dots that always makes me excited as it's prelude to what's coming. Just really great, Pilar. So as we sort of come in here for the close, I know that people are going to want to know more. So I'm going to tell the listeners right now to go to healthydeviant.com. You can actually take a quiz to figure out if you're a healthy deviant or not, and connect with Pilar. Because, my goal, and certainly our goal with the Think Health Summit, is to start educating and getting more and more people to understand that they have the power over their health, that they can take charge of their lives. They don't just have to go along with the flow. And deviants, as you said, have that virtuous cycle. They actually fight against the norm. Any closing thoughts in our final minutes, Pilar, that perhaps you want to share that I didn't ask you about?
Oh, well, thank you so much for that. I think one of the things I would love to emphasize for folks is that you don't have to be currently the model of health and fitness to be a healthy deviant. This is not about six-pack abs and bikini bodies and how many push-ups you can do. If you like getting into that stuff, it's cool. I mean, all are welcome in the Healthy Deviant tent. And I think it's really important for folks to know it's a spectrum. I talk about healthy deviance as being a spectrum. There's lots of healthy deviance in the making, all the way to hardcore healthy deviance. And there are those people I call decidedly non-deviant, just who are not interested in this stuff right now, or they're having crises in their lives and it's not the right time. So, wherever you come from is fine. I'm mostly interested in helping people figure out what are the next steps on their own healthy deviant pathway, on their journey, which is really, like, I call it the healthy deviant hero's journey. It is a dramatic journey where you decide to turn from the downwards descent that you've been in and change your life in some way that puts you back in control of your own healthy living choices. And I want to be clear that it's not about willpower, that ultimately most of the tools that I offer people are tools that allow them to experiment in the direction of what feels better, not what feels like self-denial and misery and willpower, because that's exhausting too. And honestly, choosing to be a healthy person in an unhealthy world is not the easiest thing. I mean, anytime you deviate from social norms, it requires some energy and determination and willingness. So, rebuilding your capacity, what I call your mojo, is really the first step. So, I would just encourage anybody who's interested and afraid that maybe this is too hard or too scary or above them, rethink that. And please check out some of the stuff at healthydeviant.com. I hope you'll read the book too. I want to remind people that it's an illustrated book. So a lot of the things that we're talking about, like cycles of healthy deviance and the vicious cycle of the unhealthy default reality, are all illustrated in the book. And I think that that's really fun. I find that pictures often tell better stories, and human reality tells better stories than textbook presentations. So it's a fun book. I hope folks will check that out. Oh, and I should mention too, I'm co-host of this podcast called The Living Experiment with my friend Dallas Hartwig, and that is at livingexperiment.com. And there are a number of episodes that relate to healthy deviance if folks want to go deeper. But maybe the easiest place to start is, like I said, the quiz, which is at healthydeviant.com/quiz. And there's a free preview of the book. The whole first chapter and introduction is available for free to anybody who wants to check that out at healthydeviant.com/preview, I believe. I'm so happy to have a chance to talk to you, Kim. This is really fun. Thank you.
It's been wonderful, Pilar. Thank you so much. And as I said, you have so much to offer the world, and we've been blessed by your presence, and I'm really excited to have you on the summit. So thanks again for your time. And I certainly hope that the listeners have enjoyed learning, and that we've just perhaps touched a nerve in a bunch of people. I think it's time to go and research this. So have fun with that, everybody. Enjoy this episode. And Pilar, I really look forward to the summit. So thanks again.
Me too. Thanks so much, Kim. Thanks for having me.